It began with a window and ended with an empire in ruins. For 30 relentless years, Europe burned. Kingdoms fell, faith divided, and entire cities vanished beneath fire and steel. This wasn't just a war between princes or popes. It was a conflict that reshaped the very soul of Europe, the bloodiest chapter before the modern age. And yet, so few remember it. Today, on Arahive, where history speaks, we dive deep into the 30 Years' War, a labyrinth of religion, politics, betrayal, and diplomacy, whose echoes still shape our world today. Was it a holy war, a power grab, or the end of the medieval world? Stay with us. The truth is more tangled than you imagine. The 30 Years' War, Europe's forgotten apocalypse. The spark in Bohemia. It all started in Prague, a city of spires, scholars, and suspicion. In 1618, tensions between Protestant nobles and the Catholic Habsburgs had reached a boiling point. Two imperial governors, sent by the Holy Roman Emperor to enforce Catholic rule, were thrown from a castle window by angry Protestant rebels. Miraculously, they survived, but the act, known as the Second Defenestration of Prague, was a declaration of war. What followed wasn't just rebellion. It was a fuse, lit in Bohemia, that would explode across the entire continent. Protestant princes rallied against the Catholic emperor. Catholic armies mobilized to crush heresy. And Europe, already divided by the Reformation, now found itself sliding toward catastrophe. Few imagined that a local uprising would unleash a war that would last 3 decades and kill 1 in every 5 Germans. But the spark had been lit, and the fire would not stop here. A war of faith and thrones. What began as a religious revolt soon spiraled into something far more complex. The Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II, a staunch Catholic, vowed to crush Protestant resistance with fire and sword. He called upon allies like Spain and the Catholic League. On the other side, Protestant states looked to the Dutch Republic, England, and even Lutheran Sweden for aid. But as the bloodshed escalated, old alliances blurred. Catholic France, fearing the rising power of the Habsburgs more than they feared Protestantism, shocked the world by joining the Protestant cause. This wasn't just a holy war, it was a chessboard of power, a theater where popes and kings alike gambled with the lives of millions. Europe became a battlefield of ambition, where generals fought not for faith, but for territory, titles, and vengeance. It was no longer clear who was righteous, only who would survive. The Swedish storm. From the icy north came a lion, Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. In 1630, the Protestant cause stood on the brink of collapse. Cities were burning, armies shattered, hope fading. But when Gustavus landed in Pomerania with a disciplined army and revolutionary tactics, the war changed overnight. He was not just a king, he was a soldier, a strategist, and a symbol. His troops moved with unprecedented speed, his artillery struck with precision, and his presence on the battlefield ignited morale. Victory after victory followed. At Breitenfeld, he shattered the Catholic League's forces. At Lech, he pushed deeper into imperial territory. Europe watched in awe and fear. Here was a Protestant savior or a northern conqueror, but his meteoric rise would be cut short. In 1632, at the bloody Battle of Lutzen, Gustavus Adolphus was killed, leading his men in the fog and smoke. The Lion of the North had fallen, but his legacy had transformed the war. It was now a conflict no longer about survival, but supremacy. The burnt earth of Germany. By the mid-1630s, Germany was no longer a land of battles. It was a land of ruins. Towns were sacked, fields burned, churches desecrated. Soldiers, both friend and foe, lived off the land, plundering what little remained. Civilians paid the highest price. Famine spread like wildfire. Disease followed. In some regions, up to 60% of the population vanished. Entire villages disappeared from maps. Mothers buried their children. Farmers became beggars. The war had become a machine with no off switch, fed by foreign gold and ancient grudges. Mercenary armies, unbound by loyalty, fought for whoever paid them most. They looted, raped, and murdered with impunity. The names of cities, Magdeburg, Heidelberg, Würzburg, became bywords for horror. This wasn't just a war between princes or prophets, it was the death of an age. The Holy Roman Empire, once a patchwork of proud states, now lay in ashes. The dream of a united Christendom had turned to dust, replaced by a hellscape of greed, fire, and forgotten graves. The French gamble. And then, as if the war hadn't already devoured enough, France stepped in. Catholic France, siding with Protestant powers. It defied logic, yet made perfect sense to one man, Cardinal Richelieu. He didn't care about faith. He cared about power. The Habsburgs, ruling both Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, surrounded France like a tightening noose. Richelieu's answer? Break the Habsburg grip. In 1635, France declared war, not in the name of God, but of state. French troops surged into the Rhineland, while Spanish armies retaliated from the south. The conflict, already continental, now exploded into total war. Old alliances shattered, new ones formed out of convenience, not conviction. For the next decade, Europe burned brighter than ever. From the fields of Flanders to the forests of Bohemia, men fought not for salvation, but for survival. And behind it all, Richelieu pulled strings like a grand puppeteer. France's gamble would cost it dearly in blood and treasure. But if it succeeded, it would change the balance of Europe forever. The longest peace talks in history. By the early 1640s, Europe was exhausted. Not just its armies, its people, its kings, its crops, its faith. Death had become ordinary. Villages were ghost towns. Empires were bleeding. And still, the war dragged on. But finally, in 1644, delegates gathered to talk. Not for days, not for months, but for years. Welcome to Westphalia, the site of the most complex peace negotiations Europe had ever seen. Over 100 delegations, dozens of languages, endless feasts, arguments, and standoffs. In Münster and Osnabrück, priests, diplomats, nobles, and spies met behind closed doors. They argued over borders, thrones, religion, even seating arrangements. But slowly, painfully, they stitched together something no one believed possible: peace. It wasn't justice, it wasn't reconciliation, it was survival. After 30 years of slaughter, exhaustion won where armies had failed. In 1648, the Peace of Westphalia was signed. A war that began with holy fury ended with political compromise. The sword gave way to the pen, and the world would never be the same. A new Europe is born. The ink was barely dry on the treaties, but their impact rippled across continents. The Peace of Westphalia didn't just end a war, it rewrote the rules of Europe. The Holy Roman Empire was shattered into hundreds of autonomous states. The Pope was ignored in the signing, a symbolic death blow to Rome's authority. France emerged stronger, richer, feared. Spain, humbled. The Dutch Republic and Switzerland were formally recognized as independent after decades of struggle. But more than redrawn borders, Westphalia planted the seeds of something radical: the modern nation-state. No longer would kings claim divine right to interfere in their neighbor's realm. Sovereignty, the right to rule one's own territory without outside meddling, had been born. It was imperfect, incomplete, but revolutionary. In the smoking ruins of war, Europe had chosen a fragile peace built not on faith, but on balance. The era of religious supremacy had ended. The age of diplomacy had begun. The cost of 30 years. Peace may have come, but at a terrible price. The 30 Years' War was one of the most devastating conflicts in European history. Germany, the war's primary battleground, was left in tatters. Entire towns were erased. Some regions lost over half their population. Famine, plague, and violence claimed more lives than battles ever did. Crops rotted in fields. Forests reclaimed farmland. Children grew up not knowing peace, only hunger and the sound of marching boots. Economies collapsed, trust between neighbors shattered. Soldiers, now jobless and hardened by brutality, turned to banditry. Even language changed. To plunder and to sack became everyday fears. It wasn't just a war between kings, it was a war that tore apart the soul of a continent. Historians would debate for centuries who truly won, but what's certain is who lost: the people. Lessons etched in blood. blood. From the ashes of the 30 Years' War emerged not just new borders, but new thinking. Leaders realized that endless war over religion or pride could destroy empires faster than any enemy. The Peace of Westphalia became more than a treaty. It was a blueprint: diplomacy over dogma, sovereignty over supremacy, balance of power over blind conquest. These ideas would echo through the centuries, shaping the League of Nations, the United Nations, even today's international law. The war taught Europe, through unimaginable suffering, that peace must be built, not wished for, that compromise is not weakness, but survival. The 30 Years' War ended with no clear victors, but its legacy? A world that would, eventually, learn to negotiate before it burns. The 30 Years' War may have ended in 1648, but its echoes still haunt the corridors of modern diplomacy. Borders redrawn in blood, faith wielded as a weapon, power balanced on a blade's edge. These are not just relics of the past. They are warnings, reminders, lessons. And here on Arahive, where history speaks, we bring these voices back to life. Subscribe and step deeper into the past with us. The 30 Years' War was more than a war. It was a mirror, and in that mirror, we still see ourselves.